Hi, this is Aaron Wissner of Local Future. I am here on the line live again with DiAnna Ritola. Do you go by Ritola nowadays?
Professionally, I do. I go by Fitztola. That's the name I took when I got married. But I just generally use that colloquially with folks. You can call me whatever you like. I'm good with that.
I'm very curious. Can I ask you a couple of lead-in questions?
Yeah, bring it.
Where are you in New York City, more or less?
I live in Flushing, which is in Queens. So I am about 12 miles from Manhattan. To get there, the most direct way, I would take the Long Island Expressway into Manhattan via the Midtown Tunnel, the Queens Midtown Tunnel. There are multiple ways to get around in New York City, as you may know or imagine, but that would be the most direct way to get where I'd like to go most of the time. So that is exactly where I'm located.
And I'm out in the
sticks.
I'm far. Yes, I'm far. Grand Rapids is about 35-minute drive. So are people gathering?
Is it Grand Rapids is west of you?
North, more or less.
Okay.
Are people doing on the weekends? They do mass gatherings and stuff.
We have a park that's fairly close to where we live. And I have, I walk our dog regularly there, and it is more crowded on weekends, but not tremendously. Pre-pandemic, it was very, very crowded on the weekends, but because it doesn't have a whole lot of athletic spaces, it's not one of the larger crowd things. There are lots of community groups that center around weekend soccer, or depending on your ethnicity or your country of origin, football. And so parks and recreation centers that have lots of soccer fields tend to have billions of people. Like, it's very, very crowded on the weekends.
Hey, before we get any further,
yes.
There's some people that are just about to leave because they didn't know what this was about. Can we talk about, you work with people, right, as far as counseling, right?
Yes, I do.
Can we talk about stuff like childhood trauma and love, both of them?
Me too. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're okay with that? Sure. Just so people know that we're actually going to talk about that.
Yes, content warning.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, some people will be like, are they just going to chat all day?
Oh, right. Yes. Yes, we're going to talk about that too.
Okay. It's interesting that you say this, because as far as just a little tidbit of communication, when I ask a question in a very short way, sometimes I don't put in enough information. By mass gatherings, I was referring to a group of people who got together because they were angry about what was going on with George.
I see.
Everything.
All right. So you were talking about marches and or protests. And
I was talking about gatherings,
right,
which could take the place of a march if that's decided by the gathering.
Right.
It could be rah-rah.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, when I've been like Occupy Wall Street, when I was in NYC for that,
yeah,
it was mostly a gathering.
It actually was mostly a gathering. I think that some of the gatherings have maybe started out with stillness, sort of being in place for a bit, but there's not been that in Flushing. Most of that has centered in Manhattan and Brooklyn, a little bit in the Bronx. I believe there was something on Staten Island, but I'm not sure. So I've not seen it personally. I don't feel that my place is to march. I feel that my place is more to hold the spiritual center and to work on that realm. So rather than physically being present, I'm doing a lot of praying and monitoring of sort of like the energies involved. Although, since my wife is a first responder, I am keenly aware of some of the movements of different groups of people and how first responders are actually responding and preparing and helping and or perhaps reacting in less helpful ways. So I'm getting a little bit of that information as well.
So shall we jump right in to, I mean, I don't have any idea as far as your practice working with people, if that's like 5 people in your lifetime or 500 people in your lifetime. So I don't know the scale that you talk with people.
Okay, so I will say that it's probably closer to the 500 level.
Okay.
But it is also, there are times when I have, it's been more what I call chaplaincy or pastoral care. And sometimes it's more what looks more like traditional counseling, in that someone pays me to do it in different ways.
I'm curious if you have ongoing clients right now, like weekly, if you have 2 a week or 10 people you see on a weekly basis?
I would say I have several clients. I tend to see people every other week, unless they are in immediate crisis, in which case I see them every week. I give a lot of homework, and I also understand that most people need time to integrate. And so when I'm having a session with a client and we're talking about things that are painful or upsetting, or just sort of like your general daily struggles, and I'm giving suggestions for new activities, it often takes time and repetition for those activities to bear fruit, or to even see if you like them, or for many people to actually do anything, because humans are both inherently lazy and beautifully hopeful. Right? We don't really want to do something hard, but we really just want to get to the good feeling part on the end of it. So oftentimes when you're dealing with stuff that's uncomfortable, you have to train yourself to notice the what I call like the baby steps of success, or the track record of, so you can go, oh, I did this thing and it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. That felt pretty good. Okay, then I can do this next thing that's probably not very comfortable, but I'm going to try that anyway. For instance, having a difficult conversation with your spouse, or saying no.
I imagine we've all had that.
Or several, or saying no and setting a boundary when your practice has been to acquiesce either verbally or tacitly, with yeah, okay, and maybe then not like the outcome, but thinking that the confrontation is far more painful than the acquiescence.
So before we get to the, so my question is kind of going to what we're seeing in the streets, as far as in the media, where we're actually seeing some, people using their energy in their body to propel things at things that other people are very unhappy about. And so things are breaking. And sometimes they're propelling things that are on fire, and those things are burning. And so there's what's called, damage to these various things. These things are being damaged, and apparently that's very upsetting for certain people, like the people who use those things to make money.
Yes.
Or usually just to make money. Well, and those that go there because that's where they get their money. Right. So, I mean, typically this is, I don't want to not clarify for anybody that hasn't caught on. This is normally called property destruction. When you have a tornado, it comes through, it destroys a lot of property. Occasionally, someone will get hurt and die if they're in the house and it collapses on them or whatever. As far as I can tell so far, a lot of property destruction, no violence. So that's good. We've been having
incorrect. To my knowledge, there have been no active deaths associated with any of these gatherings.
Okay.
Or marches or protests.
Broken arms.
There have been several people, including police officers who have been injured with fire. There was in fact, last night there was a incendiary something thrown through a window of a fire truck, and two of the firefighters inside were burned.
Was that NYC then?
Yeah, that was here. I think it was up in the Bronx, but I'm not exactly sure. There was also a police officer.
Now that is violence, so that's different.
Yeah.
Property damage is a tornado where people are okay.
Right.
Violence is when someone is intentionally harmed, or there's so much carelessness that it's pretty obvious that there could be, I mean, a fire truck, obviously there's people in it if it's sitting there.
Right. There have been many acts of violence by police officers, pushing, shoving, moving people back. There certainly has been, I did see a photograph of a partner of a police officer that I happen to know, who had a cut on his face. I'm not exactly sure what hit him, but it certainly wasn't a fist. It was much more of a sharp object. And so there are acts of violence, and there is property destruction, and there is, to a lesser degree, and it's not stuff that seems as problematic in my opinion, vandalism, which is more like property bruising rather than property destruction, in my opinion. But that's still needs to be cleaned up and dealt with, but not causing like structural damage.
I imagine there's been a lot of angry words and glances and shaking of fists and hollering and swearing as well.
I am sure that is true. There has also been a good amount of contained anger, or maybe not contained. I would say well-channeled anger, right? We are protesting this particular activity by certain individuals who happen to wear a badge and a body armor. Not everyone that we have ever met wearing that particular uniform has behaved badly, but enough people have that collectively we are angry, right? And so when I see collective anger channeled into calling out the behaviors and the intentions that seem to be behind those behaviors, that to me is a very healthy use of anger. I also think that there are people who are opportunistic, and they will take the opportunity of chaos or implied chaos to advance chaos in another realm, whether that's through violence or property destruction, or speaking more loudly about things that should happen or could happen. So
yes. what I've read, and what seems to be the common understanding amongst the people I talk to, is that a lot of this is incited by various groups who just want to see, they just want to see it burn. They just want to see it burn is all they want. And it could be because, I think it goes all the way back to the terror that one experiences when they have no faith, the terror and death. But that's a long ways back from just being angry. I'm wondering if you could share what you, in your practice, what your insights are on the origins of anger and violence, anger and violence. Typically that's associated with men in our society, not 100%, of course. Anger and violence and fear, all three of those. Anger, violence, fear. I think you probably, I imagine you deal with some violence and abuse, but you also, probably it's fear that presents itself first to you.
Yes, I would say that. Well, there are certain kinds of fear that are okay to express. And depending on your socialization or the family you grew up in, those different kinds of fear, right? I'm afraid my partner is going to hurt me, right? That's a fear. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job, right? I'm afraid that my child is not going to do well in school, or that my child is going to become ill, or my child is ill and I'm afraid my child is going to die. Or
What is the common source of all these fears?
I think the common
Because
source
when a
of all
baby
these
is
fears-
born, I don't
Right.
think it's fearful. I think it learns fear.
Yes and no. Um, First of all, we are animals, right? We are mammals. We come with the basic fears of falling and of being abandoned, right? So because human babies and other infants in mammal world don't come out able to care for themselves, there is an innate fear which drives the crying response, or in animals some sort of scratching or vocalization of, hey, notice me, don't let me starve to death.
And it would have to be there. It would have to be there because if the little baby zebra wasn't fearful when it was away from its mother, then it would be more likely to be the one that was eaten. So when it,
well, and
when it gets,
right, but more likely they would not get fed, right? All mammals feed from their mothers, and so until zebras are different because they're faster anyway. They start eating food, not just from their moms, but they start eating food, far faster than human babies. They are able to care for themselves on a certain level faster than a human child.
this reminds me of some videos I've seen of like baby chimps and how they stay like very close and they come and touch, and then
Yeah.
they'll go out like 10 feet and they'll play and they'll come back. And as they get older, they'll go a little bit further, but they'll come back and touch. And
right. And they need to know that their caregiver is there. They're, and humans are no different, right? Some kids are a little bit more adventurous, but it's a rare child who gets lost in a grocery store who isn't calling for the parent who brought them to that store, or the adult, right? They're not just wandering randomly, exploring the store, shopping for themselves, unless it's a movie.
it's scary getting lost.
It is scary getting.
I was lost as a kid in a store more than once.
Right, and it generally starts out with the adventure of hiding and waiting to be found. And when that doesn't happen, that's when fear comes in. And so we are born with a certain amount of fear that is designed to help keep us alive. But the other fears that we develop over time seem to come back to that basic fear of, am I going to survive? Because ultimately we learn to equate those fears with the basic fear of survival. So even if you're in a situation where you're not getting your own way, right? We talked about that the last time. So
that's okay. You can refresh because people might not have seen that one.
Right. So we talked about last time the anger that comes when we don't get our own way, whether we're 3 years old or 30 years old or 53 or older, right? We often get angry when we don't get what we want when we want it. And how we learn to express that anger or deal with that anger is where we are on sort of our spiritual journey, our social, emotional, mental health journey. But ultimately, when we don't get our way, there is a seed or a little thread that links back to the ultimate fear of annihilation, the ultimate fear of, I'm going to die. The biological imperative is to keep life going, right? That's why we procreate. That's why we nourish ourselves. That's why we continue to fight for air even as our lungs are shutting down. Right? The body wants to stay alive.
I don't know if genes could actually encode a sense of death, but I mean, obviously there's chemicals associated with fear because of certain things. I would challenge you a little bit, or just either turn to wonder, because I don't know that any baby is born with a concept of the void. I mean, that's something where you have to really think about it.
Right.
So,
No, and I don't think it's a conceptual thing. I think it's a biological, like the body doesn't want to shut down.
oh, sure, yeah.
I think it becomes a concept as we develop the notion of separation. So babies don't realize that they are separate from their mothers, right? They come out and it takes several months for that understanding of a separate being to come into play. And sometimes and then it's a very gradual thing.
When does that happen?
I notice it mostly, and I haven't read child development in a long time, but.
Can you just pause for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems to me, and I'm going to use the zebra as the example, and also it's called the pygmy chimpanzee. It's called the bonobo.
Yeah.
They seem to feel like they're part of the community with their mother and everybody else, like all the time. Like the bonobo, for example, they're always touching each other, hugging each other, grooming each other.
They're a very tactile.
Yeah. So, and the zebra are like that too. I mean, yeah, the boys spar and every once in a while, but they seem to be very like, you know, I don't see that there's any line between, hey, this is when baby zebra lost the feeling of oneness.
I don't really know about that. What I do know is that most of our ability to conceptualize separation happens as the brain develops. So many times, unless the baby has some sort of sensory processing anomaly, stranger danger, or that idea of it's not okay to be with somebody else, it doesn't really happen until around 8 or 9 months. That's sort of the timeline in which brain development suddenly kicks into my mom is separate from me, or my caregiver, the person I'm most connected with. And I guess that may actually work with dads now too, simply because many dads are spending much more time in the initial bonding stages with babies.
Is this because, like in Africa, for example, in a community that lives very similar to the way communities have lived for thousands of years. I mean, I always see these images of the babies and the mothers, even when the babies are large, you know, that they're right there all the time. You know, they're carried around, body to body contact.
Yeah.
And like what I have read is that in a isolated tribe, for example, of humans, for example, in the Amazon, there's actually people that don't know about civilization. They live in a band tribe. Also in Sentinel Island near India and New Guinea, northern New Guinea, apparently. And the mothers will nurse until 5 or 6 or 7. I don't know exactly the number, but it's like, there's a while.
Yes.
You know, but in this culture, I mean, nursing was almost extinguished for a time. And I mean, that's separation, right? I mean, the fact that you're not with body to body contact with your mother, like our ancestors. I mean, that was successful for them. So I'm just curious if it makes me wonder if that fear of others and being separated isn't somehow related to the fact that the closeness is not really as long. I mean, once the child is like, you know, I want to go away and play, that's different than I'm going to put you over here in the crib
Absolutely.
and the baby cries because it's not normal for the baby to be put in the, it's normal for the baby to be held.
Yeah.
Or at least like on the lap or right next door or whatever.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but I haven't been a mother,
Right.
but I've observed mothers though.
Right. Exactly. Well, and it's, there are lots and lots and lots of researchers who do developmental brain research, especially with children and infants. But from my own experience and from my readings of attachment theory for parenting, the longer we can remain connected to our children, the more secure they are in their connection to us as their parents, and then in their connection to themselves, because they learn trust through our responses to their needs. So when a baby is crying and the parent responds fairly immediately, and soothes and comforts, that child tends to, over time, become more and more secure. And because that child is secure, then that child is free to go and come back in whatever length. But if that child doesn't trust that the parent will come when there is a need, whatever that need is, hungry, dirty, lonely, whatever, then first of all, the child will cry louder to get more attention. And eventually, if no response is given, that child shuts down, right? So there was a very famous study of orphanages.
As if they were left in the grass and they had cried, but then no one came. But then the successful behavior after that is to shut up.
Yes.
So that no lion comes and eats you.
Perhaps, or just because you're exhausted, right? And I don't know how long this is going, but there was a study of orphanages, and I'm tracked even perhaps one orphanage in, my brain wants to say Russia, but I can't tell you that's exactly true. But where there was not enough staff, and or the instruction was to just leave the babies. You did the minimum. You gave them a bottle. You changed their diaper, but there was no hugging, no cuddling, no loving interactions. And I don't even know if there was much speaking to the child. And those children failed to thrive. They stopped eating. They stopped crying. They stopped reaching out for connection. And we do see that still today.
I'm hoping this was a study in like retrospect rather than a study that was planned.
I think it was based on what was noticed, but I don't know. I can't remember what year that was. So what we have found as humans doing this is that it's imperative for our survival, both our physical survival and our emotional survival, to be connected to other people. And when we're not, we're traumatized. And trauma is not pain, right? Pain is something that we all experience. Discomfort is something that we all experience. Trauma is when that pain is not mitigated, or it's repeated so often that the pain doesn't have a chance to heal. So if we liken it to an injury, if you get a splinter in your hand, and you take it out, bandage it up, and kind of leave it alone, just, do the self-care that you need, that wound will heal, right? You have a cut on your hand, or but you've taken care of it, you've cleaned it, you've bandaged it. Your body will do the work of healing that wound. But if you have this wound on your hand and then you spend the next day using that hand to use a tool so that injury is being irritated every time, or you are a scab picker and you keep picking at said scab, the wound will never actually heal. It is similar with psychological wounds.
Can you give us just like
Something brief?
a list? No, like a list of like, here's an example, here's an example, here's an example, here's an example. We don't know who your clients are now or way back in the past.
Sure, absolutely.
Like just rattle them off.
Yeah.
Trauma.
Well, okay. Being abandoned and put up for adoption, child sexual abuse, ongoing bullying in the school or the home, constantly being compared to others, whether that's other siblings, other children. Why aren't you like, this person or that person? Physical violence, ongoing physical violence, neglect, someone whose parent who is unable to care for them, either through having to be away for work or through mental illness and being, like just emotionally unable to care for someone. And they are put into a grown-up sort of role at the age of 5 or 6. You take care of your brother. You take care of your sister. Go cook dinner. Being unable to talk about being, if someone has been harmed by someone outside the family, grandpa pushed me down, and you bring that home and you say, grandpa pushed me down and I cut my hand or I cut my knee. Oh no, that didn't happen. Grandpa would never do that. Well, now that there's been a reinforcement of the trauma because the child wasn't believed, right? So the initial pain, grandpa pushed me down, was then somehow denied by grandpa, because otherwise the child wouldn't describe it as pushed me down. I fell down and grandpa helped me, right? But then it's reinforced by diminishment or denial or gaslighting. Oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. And so then that becomes something that you can't talk about. And then if that pain recurs, there's another push, it escalates into further violence, then it becomes trauma because it gets stuck. It's something we can't talk about. It's something we can't process. It's something that we can't deal with.
It brings to mind my son, who I really just wanted him to have the experience and a little bit of skill in wrestling, because normally a group of humans in a group way back in time would have wrestled. The kids would have wrestled around all the time, and they'd roly-poly wrestling, seeing what they could do. Right. But nowadays kids don't wrestle. They don't know, what's an appropriate amount of force to use so that it's still fun. So I thought, hey, I'd really like you to try this, because I think it's kind of fun, and you have an opportunity to gain at least a little bit of skill. I mean, there's always a possibility in your life you're going to need to wrestle someone. I mean, sure, you might need to wrestle them off somebody else or whatever. But
he didn't like it.
Well, they wrestled. This is a wrestling match.
Okay.
The goal is to not only to wrestle, but to pin them and to inflict enough pain that they won't move. And so the idea is to pull their arm like at a weird angle and push them down. And so coming into it brand new, none of the kids know what the right amount of force is. So they overdo it often.
Sure.
And then the coach says, oh, he's getting tougher. He's toughening it up. He's getting tougher. Or I'll say to yep, it's going to hurt like that. And that's how it's going to be. So this is what popped to mind when you said this just now. I mean, a lot of things popped to mind, but that was like the personal one.
Sure. And I think that currently in our society. That is one of the ways in which we socialize children to understand that you're going to get hurt sometimes. All right, here's some ways in which you're going to be allowed to experience some sensations that you may or may not like, but with a larger goal of success, right? But it's success without a plan, right? So if we're talking about, we keep going back to the idea of indigenous cultures where there was wrestling or there was this, but that was building on skills that would be needed as an adult in that society, right? Unless one is a professional athlete or even a semi-professional, like you like to go and do that on, as an adult, there's not a whole lot of life skills that one needs that one learns in wrestling, right? Like yes, occasionally there might be a call to have some skills to either defend oneself or defend someone else. But you're not going to use that on a daily basis. Whereas if you are someone who has to hunt, gather, and collect one's own food, you need to have a different level of physical ability and a different level of muscle awareness versus someone who is going to go teach school.
And I think I'm thinking back to the bonobos again.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would almost always be characterized as play. That there's, I mean, even though they're tumbling around, there's smiles.
Yes, I was just saying it's not aggressive. When chimpanzees turn aggressive, they have certain facial expressions and ways.
Well, that's not the chimpanzees and the bonobos. They diverged to like 2 million years ago, so
True.
they have different cultures.
But
I was going to get to the chimps. The
right.
Chimps do kind of wrestle
aggressive.
more, and actually the males are almost twice as heavy as the females, whereas the bonobos, they're almost identical in weight. So you've got the chimps. I mean, I believe the reason their muscles are probably so large is because the males have a higher testosterone level, much higher than the females. And so their muscles, just like a human male, grow significantly larger and they're stronger.
Right, and their bones are physically longer and stronger.
And testosterone level is associated with quickness to anger, is my understanding. So
I have heard that. I don't have any specific information about that. But yeah, I think that's certainly how it can be portrayed. And I believe that the bonobos are a far less testosterone filled species, if I recall the bits and pieces I've read about them, that they are far more likely to work out conflict through sharing and social engagement rather than aggression.
Sex.
Yep, they do it. They have lots of sex. They have lots of sex, and they don't actually care with whom they're having sex, right? That because it's part of the social contract rather than a procreative event.
But in that way, they are very in touch with everybody. Like everybody kind of loves everybody in a way, because they're all in contact with everybody so often. It reminds me of summer of '69 and Woodstock, or was that '68?
No, that was '69. '67 was the Monterey Pop Festival. So that's
free love, and all that whole thing where my mom had the long hair and she played the guitar and the Bob Dylan, and my dad had the long hair, and they were
you were born in '69, weren't you?
70. I was conceived in the summer of '69.
I see. All right.
Out of wedlock, and then I was born in March of '70.
Okay.
So I'm a child of that era.
Right. Yeah. Well, oh,
And you're a year younger, right? Because you were born in October of 71.
yeah. Yeah. So I'm like a year and a half younger than you. So
Yeah.
that I think that it's one of those we want so badly to feel safe, and we will do almost anything in order to do that. We will put up with behaviors that are bothersome because we want the security of relationship, or we want to or we'll move around and disrupt our lives because we have convinced ourselves that this person, this relationship, this nuclear family, this whatever, is really where we're most secure. And when things don't match our worldview, it is very hard to change your mind, right? Like, and I know that there's a whole there's a psychological term for it. I want to say it's like, no, I will say something completely wrong. But there's been studies that when you have a certain belief, you find things that match your belief system, and you disregard as inaccurate things that contradict your worldview. And so if what we believe is that, or what we want to believe is that home is a place of safety and security, and these are the people that I can trust, then when actions happen that contradict that belief, or from which we cannot escape, then we adjust our view to say that this is normal, healthy, and okay. And that's when trauma comes in, because on some level we know that harming behaviors are not normal, healthy, and okay. Right? It's one thing if if your mom turns around really quickly and knocks you to the floor, right? Which has happened to me as a parent and to me as a child, right? Like, you stand behind someone who's much larger, their eyes are up here, and your body is, below hip level. 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get knocked over at least once.
I have 2 horrible memories of that from school. One was in kindergarten when I had this big wooden block. We built, they were like these big wooden blocks that you would stack.
Yeah, we had them.
And I was spinning around and I knocked Ronnie right in the head, knocked him right to the ground. I felt so horrible because he was my best friend, and I knocked him right to the ground. And then in 5th grade, I don't know, I was spinning around or something. I was just spinning, my elbows were out. Bam, knocked Holly right to the ground. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I had a crush on Holly. She was really cute. And I felt so bad because I don't know if it was before Valentine's Day or after Valentine's Day or whatever, but I'd made her and Jody and Amy these like little special things, and I had like a crush on all 3 of them at the same time, I guess. But I was so sad about that. Maybe it was in 2nd grade with Holly, I don't remember, but yeah, I know, and you feel so bad instantly. You're like,
but so if you are the person receiving that hurt,
yeah, and
the other person immediately says, I'm so sorry, how can I help you, let's go get you an ice pack, whatever that is, then that pain doesn't turn into trauma because it's been addressed, it's been mitigated. Now, you still might be like, oh gosh, every time somebody comes at you with an elbow, but you're not going to associate trauma, it's not going to be a stuck trauma, because that hurt was apologized and dealt with. If you are in a situation where someone pushes you, or worse, uses a greater amount of force than just, I turned around and knocked into you, and then either repeats that after apologizing, or doesn't apologize and doesn't acknowledge that there was a pain there, then that can get stuck, right, and become trauma. And trauma unaddressed leads to a host of physical and mental illnesses, right? I mean, the label post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't come from just, I fell down the stairs and my mom helped, my mom got me a Band-Aid. Yeah, that was a stress. It wasn't a trauma, right? So that pain was moved through and dealt with and on. But, this came from World War II, World War I, where men were coming back from war and they called it shell shock. He's seen too much. It's, my grandfather was in World War I. And
World War II.
World War II. And he never talked about it. Never, never, never. I have no information at all about his activities.
He took that to his grave.
He did. You know what? He may have talked to peers about it.
At the VFW.
Maybe, or like his siblings, like other men that he knew in his community who had gone through, they may have had a couple of conversations, but it wasn't.
But we can't talk to people because we're men.
Exactly. Well, and how do you even begin to open up
Because we're not
pain and trauma?
We're not tough.
Right.
If we have to admit that we were hurt, because men aren't hurt by things.
Right. Or you're not affected, or you're a soldier. Suck it up. Right. But men are no less likely to be traumatized than women. Boys no less likely than girls to be traumatized.
So our difference in hormones and our muscle size and the difference in the size of that little Y chromosome, that's not enough to make us different.
Not in response to trauma, no. It makes us different in other ways. But what we're seeing with systemic trauma, right? So trauma that is not perpetrated only by an individual, but by systems of wages, systems of hiring, systems of housing fairness, systems of parenting, is that the trauma becomes so unmitigated that the only response is to explode. And whether that's an internal explosion that can look like heart attack, stroke, nervous breakdown, or whether that's an external explosion into property damage or violence against another human being, or simply standing on the street corner and saying, this isn't fucking fair, right? Like that's the explosion. That's where we long to be noticed and cared for. And when we are not, we have to find out how to make that happen or die, right? In some way. And so systemic trauma and the results of systemic trauma are part of how human societies learn to get better because they've gotten worse.
I have so many follow-up thoughts. This is going to be like a year-long series here, DiAnna. We're just going to be working on this.
Yeah, exactly.
So a couple thoughts from my life, from my schoolmates who I have been interacting with, not just in my class, but also in the adjacent classes who I also interact with.
Right. People who've known you since young.
Yes, rode the bus, out at the playground, knew their siblings. So one is the concept of tough love. And I would characterize that as strict father parenting versus nurturing mother parenting.
Okay. Yes, I want to caveat that with one thing, is that those models do not take into account the concept of healthy boundaries, which sometimes look like strict father parenting, but don't have to be that. It doesn't have to follow that model. So.
Well, sure. If you have a baby zebra that is wandering off and the mom comes over and nudges it back towards the herd, or nudges it away from the cliff, or if the bonobo or whatever does the same thing and is like, come on with me.
Right.
So it's not to say that there isn't force used to protect the baby.
Yes.
And that does take away freedom, obviously, because the child can't do what they had intended to do.
Or
but usually
when you take when your kid is reaching for something hot and you quickly slap their hand away, right? It's an initial boundary that is painful to prevent a further injury, which you can see because you are the adult. You have a larger picture. And then you explain what has happened, right? Yeah. All right, so go back.
So that's still nurturing, though.
It is still nurturing, but it's not this kind of nurturing that your gesture implied.
It's teaching.
It is teaching.
Because nurturing isn't teaching. Teaching is about avoiding mistakes or making mistakes and then, oh my gosh, not going to do that again.
Right. Figuring out the best path versus stepping over boundaries that don't give you the result you desire.
Okay. So would you recommend if you were, so a couple came to you and they were like, oh, we've never been parents before, but we're pregnant now and we're just, he thinks or she thinks, tough love is the way to go. And I think, we should just, as much freedom as possible and just loves and hugs all the way until they, leave us. If ever, they can just stay forever.
Right. Well, let me just tell you how quickly you'll get tired of that. So really the question doesn't start there, or the conversation doesn't ever start with where you are right now, because nobody comes to this particular moment with a blank slate. We always show up with all of our experiences and all of our knowledge and all of the fears and wisdoms and joys that we have accumulated over time, as well as a whole lot of assumptions that we've learned from our families and our society and our with those experiences in schooling or lack thereof. And those are the things that most people don't even think to talk about. So if I had a couple in counseling who said, hey, we're having a really hard time with this parenting thing, and we can't figure out how best to parent our child, I would start asking how they came to those decisions for each of themselves. So if the mother said, well, I think this, I would then say, well, where did you come up with that theory? How do you know that? How do you know that is true? Why do you think that is the best way? There's a story that gets bandied around a lot of how patterns get put in place and how nobody questions things. And it's about a mom and a daughter. And the daughter, who is about to start her own life away from home, says, well, show me the recipe for how you always make ham. Oh, well, I take this ham and I cut this end off and I cut this end off and I put it in the pan and I do this sort of preparation. And I put it in the oven. Well, why do you cut the ends off? Well, I don't know. Grandma always did it. Well, let's go ask Grandma. And Grandma says, well, that's because when I first started making ham, I only had a pan that would fit this. So I cut the ends off. And no one has bothered to change it, even though they have bigger pans. And so, right, like that's such an obvious thing, except we often don't question the ways in which we come to have assumptions about how relationships ought to go, about how parenting ought to go, about how I ought to behave as a woman or you ought to behave as a man. Assumptions are what brings us to stereotypes, right? Stereotypes are the things that we expect other people to do based on the category that we put them in or the category we ourselves are in. The totality of our human experience says that you can behave in any way you want. You are a man. Nothing changes the fact that you're a man. You can wear what you would like, do your hair in any way you would like. You can behave in any manner you would like and still be a man. And I can do the same thing and still be a woman. It's not, my womanness is not based on behaviors or styles or appearance or anything like that.
So you're saying that I could still be a man even if I wore clothing that was typically viewed as women's clothing?
You could do that, right? There are many men who wear women's clothing. There are many men who wear women's clothing and lots of makeup and all sorts of things and call themselves drag queens and are still men, right? Like that's a thing that people do.
But does that imply that they are homosexual by necessity or no?
They don't have to be, right? They could be, but that's, again, sexuality and the way we want to behave don't often have to do with anything, right? Like I can have sex with anybody I want and it doesn't have anything to do with the clothing choices I choose. I mean, my clothing choices are designed to signal to someone else the way I'd like to be perceived, right? So if I show up in a jacket and a top, that's different than if I showed up in my pajamas or in your pajamas or in nothing, right? Like all of these things are, but it's still a human experience, right? And so it's getting back to like the stereotypes and the assumptions. When I look at someone who is from a different community, who comes from a different faith background, who comes from a different growing up experience, and I assume that they're going to behave in a certain way, right? I'm diminishing their humanity by assuming that they can't possibly understand where I'm coming from, or that I know everything about them, or I know how they're going to act or react in any situation. And I think that in many ways, that's why we are having the pain, the eruption of pain that we see right now, is that there have been so many stereotypes, so many assumptions made, and then behaviors based on assumptions. You know, you could call it racial profiling, or you could call it systemic violence, or whatever that is. But it comes down to assumptions of hierarchy and patriarchy and people being better than other people because of whatever arbitrary nonsense somebody said at some point that other people said, yeah, I believe that too.
I would just, if you don't mind, I'd like to interject so that when we come back to it some weeks from now, you'll be like, oh yeah, you mentioned that.
Okay, right.
That my hypothesis, which is not necessarily just my hypothesis,
Right.
is that it goes back to being taught that killing someone is something that sometimes has to happen. Mm-hmm. And when I'm talking about someone, I mean some entity mm-hmm. that's a living, breathing,
right, another being.
Mm-hmm. And that's a violation of the way we as living animals, I mean, we love each other. We love each other. And if given, you know, all the fruits that are available on different places, I mean, we would probably just eat all the fruits. Mm-hmm. You know, we wouldn't go over and try to chase the little deer or whatever, or the bunny. We would be chasing after it and trying to get our fingers into it. You know, we would just be like, I mean, cute, you know, cute. You know, we'd be like, so, I mean, I just want to interject this here, okay, that there's someone that's doing killing on a daily basis. In fact, and those are people who are traumatized by it. Mm-hmm. Like if I remember in 10th or 11th grade, I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair about the meatpacking industry in the slaughterhouses in Chicago, where all the trains would come into Chicago with the cattle on them. And then the cattle, of course, are freaked out as it is. because they had been living on the range more or less.
Yeah.
Now they're locked in this box, all their freedoms taken away. Then they're moved, so all their familiarity is taken away. And then they're brought down this chute. And I'm just going to stop there, but
right, because we know where it ends, right?
Yeah. But I just want to interject that, because I mean it takes a number of steps to get back to the whole thing of thou shalt not kill, and what does it do to a person when they think, oh, it's thou shalt not kill such and such.
Right.
Thou shalt not kill humans. Thou shalt not kill white people. Thou shalt not kill Americans.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I will just also say that biologically, humans evolved to eat a variety of things. And so it is not that we are unable to hunt and eat animals, right? Like that was a part of the evolutionary. We have the gut bacteria to do that. It is now a choice, right? I'm not going to starve if I don't eat meat. Right?
I'm wondering,
yeah,
DiAnna.
Yes. I'm not advocating slaughterhouses either, my friend. I'm
wondering where you came up with this assumption.
That humans have the ability to digest meat?
Not that they have the ability to digest meat, but this was the practice which was common.
I don't know that it was common. I'm not saying that it is common. I'm saying that
for example, in the bonobos, they don't.
Right.
Unless it's a drought and there's no fruit and nothing else to eat. And then they'll be like,
that's what we got. Right. And I don't know. I was not around for that particular evolution. I'm simply stating what I do know is that the way our teeth are structured and the way our gut bacteria works, it is, we have the ability to digest multiple things.
We certainly do.
Right. So, and I'm not, that
doesn't mean it was the practice though.
No, and I have no idea. I absolutely, I'm totally I don't know what the practice and how that evolved. So, and I certainly am not advocating like the random slaughter of animals for the immense amount of burger consumption for 2 cents, right? Like I think that's just one of the craziest things that's ever happened. You know, buy a meal for $1. You know, we've reduced the value of life to, you know, mere pennies. And then we've denied humans access to true, healthy, nutrient-rich foods by creating food deserts where they cannot actually access these, because those humans are less important than other humans who have access to, you know, fabulous grocery stores where they charge you far more money than is necessary, right? Like the food distribution. We could go on about that too.
We could.
But that's not where we're here today.
I have a related question. Have you worked with one that had PTSD?
Yes.
And what was the, what was it? What was the thing they had to do or the thing done to them that caused the trauma repeatedly? What was it exactly?
Spousal
or give some examples.
Yeah. So
spousal abuse as in being beat?
Yes, being hit, being yelled at, being belittled, continually belittled, being unable to make decisions, or and being financially beholden or enslaved. So much so that learning how to get a job and pay bills was a challenge, because that was a skill that person was told they were unable to perform. They were too stupid to do that. So spousal abuse for sure. Childhood sexual trauma is a very large part of where PTSD comes from, far more than I ever would have understood when I was younger.
Mostly from family members, I imagine.
Mostly from family members. I've had a few clients who've had, first date rape kind of thing. So someone that you kind of knew. I've had one client who actually had the what people think of when they think of rape, stranger, dark alley kind of thing.
That's pretty rare proportionally, though.
Proportionally,
I mean, it's like 10 to 1, right? Or
yeah,
something.
I don't know the statistics, but it's not as common as a known offender, and usually a family member or someone who is in a role of trust, right? So a coach, a relative, a clergy person, right? That's been very common, and the trauma then gets perpetuated when it is not mitigated, right? When the actions are not mitigated, and the person who is victimized is not believed. If you aren't believed, and then you're put back in the same situation where you were harmed, and it's coming again, most of us will learn to shut down. We'll learn to dissociate from the trauma that's immediately happening, the pain that's immediately happening. We have the psychological ability to kind of remove ourselves. And actually, you see it in animals as well. So Peter Levine, who wrote a book called Waking the Tiger, talked about trauma and trauma stuck in the body, and how using somatic experiencing, getting back to a feeling place and sensation place of that trauma, and then moving your body to get rid of it. So he talks about this example of the cougar and the gazelle, or the cheetah and the gazelle. And the gazelle is exhausted and has been running, and the cat catches up with it and grabs it by the neck and drags it off, and the cheetah freezes, seemingly dead, or the gazelle, and drags gazelle off. Okay, I'm going to rest here, and then I'm going to eat this beautiful meal. And within a couple of minutes, while said cheetah is not paying attention or has gone off to get some water or whatever, the gazelle gets up, shakes, and runs away, because it went into that freeze mode of like, well, if I'm going to die anyway, I might as well not be in pain. And so has the ability to shut that down. And in humans, it looks like dissociation. It looks like taking our psychological selves away from the trauma and giving ourselves a space where we can survive. But then you end up with places where you're too afraid to go in your own psyche because it's too scary or painful. And
as in you don't even allow yourself to think about whatever happens to come to mind.
For some people, yes. For some people, it's you don't, or even the thought of thinking about it. Like I know there's something scary over there. Nope. I'm going to engage in other behaviors. I'm going to work a lot. I'm going to drink or do other forms of mind-altering substances. I'm going to volunteer for everything and keep myself so busy giving that I don't have to worry about my own stuff, right? Like there's as many times as there are socially unacceptable coping mechanisms, such as heavy drinking or drug use or isolation, there are also like super acceptable ways there. If you're working all the time, you're making a lot of money, or you're giving back to your church, and you're volunteering for this, and you've got you're making sure that homeless children are getting summer camp. You could still be a person who's not willing to deal with your own personal trauma by remaining over busy and being outwardly altruistic, while also not wanting to deal with something that's very painful.
Can you, as a person, DiAnna, look at a person and just look at them and kind of say to yourself, I think they've been traumatized based on their appearance? Sometimes,
yes. I would say not strictly appearance, but behaviors are more telling. And it is an unfortunate occurrence that most of us have been traumatized, right? So it's not actually hard to do that because if I go on the assumption that we're all kind of traumatized by something, then the question becomes, how have you dealt with it? Or are you dealing with it? Are you addressing your trauma? Are you addressing the rampant sexism in society and the racism that you see in your workplace and the dumbing down of school curriculum so that children are being forced to learn in ways that are not actually conducive to how their brains function, right? How are you dealing with that trauma, with that knowledge that there is harm present in the events and in the system that perpetuates the events, as well as, oh yeah, I bet you came from an abusive household, or I bet that you know, there's also the trauma that comes from being part of a perpetuating group, college fraternities that haze, right? The trauma of the perpetrator is often lost, and it is just
trauma of the perpetrator.
Right. It is just as harmful to your soul, your spirit, your psyche, to cause harm as it is to be on the receiving end of harm.
Because no one wants to cause harm.
It is outside of our nature. And generally, those who are harmed become harmers, right? Most sex offenders are people who have experienced sexual trauma as children.
That almost implies that if someone is in prison because they were a sex offender, they were probably traumatized in the same way as children. So it's just like this ongoing thing, and they really didn't have any, they didn't have any agency really at all about their past.
Right.
And now we've locked them up in a box and taken
Mm-hmm.
away all of their freedom other than
right. Yeah.
to breathe, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked in a prison for 3 years as a chaplain. And all of those men came from trauma, I mean, I didn't know everybody's story, certainly, but bits and pieces of their stories would come out in our group meetings and our times together. And there was a lot of physical abuse and a lot of neglect and a lot of abandonment. And those small boys went on to hurt others.
I'm wondering, does this go all the way back to when the Europeans went and took the people away from their lands and traumatized them by doing that?
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, and it wasn't just Europeans. I mean, in more recent times, Europeans, but it's also been, the Huns. And I mean, taking people from their land is one of the strategies of war and conquer, right? You take people away from what they know, and then you tell them that they can't have anything like that, right? They can't have their own religion. They can't have their own ways of doing things. They can't have the foods they used to know. Or you keep them where they are, but you make them do all those things while you watch them, right? You can stay right here, but I'm in charge now. And if you don't do it my way, I will hurt you. I will harm you. I will harm your children. I will rape your wife. Rape is a tool of war for women, children, and men. Right? This is what conqueror status looks like. And yeah, we see it. It is centuries old. Centuries old.
I'm just kind of seeing the string of violence, from pulling people out of their communities in Africa, putting them on these ships, bringing them across, telling they don't know the language, getting the whips out and showing them how to do this. And the children growing up under that constant, and then the parents maybe forgetting the nurturing way, the parents. And so the trauma just continuing forward to the now within that community.
And supported and perpetuated by all of the communities around them, right? Because again, we don't live in isolation, except for the very few tribes that you sort of mentioned, right? We are always in each other's pockets, whether we like it or not. Maybe not physically, but through media, through story, through governmental laws and policies. It is.
So everything that takes away freedom, basically, because if we go back to the bonobo, for example, I mean, they don't control one another. I mean, they don't attempt to, the mother doesn't attempt, once she has an adolescent, she doesn't attempt to control it by saying things or by waving her arms. That adolescent does whatever it does, which it's learned to do, which is basically, hang out and have fun and go eat food. And and the same with the zebra. I mean, the zebra can go wherever they want. I mean, when they're adults, I mean, they're not going to wander away from their herd because they love the herd and the herd loves them. So they're not going to wander away, but they have pretty much, I mean, if they want to go over here and they want to go over here and they're like, hey, there's good grass there.
No one stops them.
Yeah. Right. But that's not the way it is in a civilization. In a civilization, people have to go certain places at certain times. So the amount of freedom is
restricted.
So restricted. It might be a half an hour a day where really choice time, whatever you want to do. But of course you're here and you're always here because this is where we live. So you're free, but your freedom's like, yeah, you're free.
Your choices are limited, right?
Yeah.
Right. Part of the social contract is that you give up some freedoms for some security, right? So
do the bonobo not have security?
Well,
they seem to be pretty happy.
Okay,
in community.
But that is how they don't know anything else, right? Like so let's just extrapolate this. Bonobo A has decided that she would like to just see what's on the other side of that clearing. She can do that. She may choose to do that. But the security of knowing this container of where her loved ones are brings her back, right? So she's choosing to give up some freedom for security.
She's choosing to give up. Oh yes, well, but she's
choosing to not go farther than X amount of yards or even miles before coming back, right?
She becomes sad.
Right.
She misses the herd quite quickly.
Absolutely. And humans do too, right? So there are always going to be people who are.
So we're talking about community and family.
Right. Well,
extended family.
Family's your first community, right? You've got this, whether it's just the baby and the mother, or the baby, the mother, the father, or the baby, the siblings, the mother, the father, right? But that nuclear family is the first community. Now, if you, or like the bonobo, live in clusters of nuclear families that function sort of as a whole unit, right? Where children are sort of parented as they get older by multiple different parents because we all kind of agree to the same boundaries and structure, then that becomes a tribe, right? A clan, a group of
We're going to use the word band.
Band. I like that. It's a band.
Tribe has a negative connotation in 2020 English. So band.
Okay. A band of people.
Or just a neighborhood is even better.
Okay. Yes, and a neighborhood implies that people are not related to each other. So,
okay.
So I can see band or clan simply because generally in those smaller communities and communities of, 200 people or less, they are all somehow related to each other. It's rare that someone unrelated enters or that someone else goes to a different group. But regardless, we have, in the vast array of potential and possibility, cut certain things off in order to achieve the security of living in groups, right? So there's always going to be that one person who's like, I want to go this way, and I'm going to go this way as long as I can, and maybe I'll come back and maybe I won't. We'll see what happens along the way, right?
I don't think that happens with the zebra. I don't think a zebra just
decides
to wander off.
Okay, again, a zebra is a herd animal, and it's also a prey animal, right? So humans are predatory animals. We have a different brain structure and a different way of going about things.
I'm wondering, where did you come up with this assumption, DiAnna?
That humans are predatory?
Yes, exactly.
Because our eyes face forward, and prey animals have eyes on the side of their head. I read that in a biology class in college, maybe? I don't know.
Interesting.
Right.
And so even though the bonobo also have eyes pointed forward and they're herbivores, you're using this piece of evidence from a class that you had back in the 90s.
Right. Well, I don't ever see zebras living on their own.
Right.
Right. I don't.
So they're herd animals. We agree that they're herd animals.
Right. So it is against their nature, I think, to have that idea of I will leave and go and not come back.
Exactly.
Right. I don't know for sure why humans developed that particular adventurous piece of I'm going to leave, go check this out over here, and I might not come back. That is an evolutionary piece that I am unaware of. Do you know? Do you have that? Do you have information about that?
Not that we would have time for.
Okay. Well, right. So I don't know. I think that folks who, I think that we do give up a certain desire for freedom, for the security of living in community. And I think that other people assume that they get to dictate what the structure of that community looks like, regardless of whether certain people like it or not. You can leave anytime you want to, right? How many times have you heard, you don't like America, get the heck out, or other forms of that particular kind of thing. But that assumes that the way I view
that sounds like that sounds like being evicted from your house when you're a 5-year-old.
Doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've been kicked out of your family.
Yeah.
What kind of family is that?
Right. And what kind of skills do you have to actually function? Right. Right. If you have only been raised in community, how do you function individually?
I think if it isn't apparent that humans are social organisms, they're herd animals, and we see that behavior continuously in social movements. Whenever people actually get together and they are all free, they're actually free because they're breaking the bounds of whatever it is that was holding them back. And they get together and they're free and they sit in circles and they move together and they protect each other because they're resisting the forces that restrict them and constrain them. And so when we see freedom in humans, like in the Arab Spring, for example,
Yeah.
what we see is herding behavior, because humans are social animals like the bonobo and like the zebra, closer to the bonobo than the zebra. And this civilization, global economic system, culture, whatever you want to call it, society, is not that.
Right.
It is like trying to make a zebra into a lion.
Yeah, okay, because lions do live in groups too, right? But they have different functions. All right, I can see where you're going. I just read an article, an interview with a guy that I can't think of right now, but it's right over there on my shelf, who studies ants and ant society, and how human societies and ant societies are not so very different, even though we would think certainly that can't be true.
Is that E.O. Wilson or is that somebody else?
Can't remember his name.
It's okay.
It's in my Sun magazine from last month or the month before. But I was fascinated by that, to think that the sort of the structure of society and of working together and having mutual benefits is inherent in colonies of ants, tens of thousands, who can all work together for the same ultimate goal, having different activities and jobs. But humans have such a hard time finding that sense of common goal. And why are there thwarters to that? Like where, and my gosh, we could talk forever, but where does the greed piece come in? And where does the hierarchical nature of I get mine, but you don't get yours?
Are you interested in me sharing a little bit about the ants?
Yes.
Because I've studied this as much as a layman would study it, not a person that's actually done research, but a person who's curious about such a topic.
Yes, and I'm noting that we are 5 minutes over the designated time, so I do need to leave in 10 minutes. But yes, I do. I am interested in what you know about ants, because I thought that article was super fun.
So there are 4 species on this planet that have evolved into what's known as eusocial behavior. So there's the ants that build ant mounds. There's the bees. They're the termites. And then there's another species of mammal. It's called the naked mole rat. So these are all eusocial. So they're beyond herding. They're like the next evolutionarily stable strategy for plant eaters. So being herders works pretty well, but there's some issues with that, because the ones in the center don't really have as much.
Right.
And so you can imagine the ancestors of the ants and the ancestors of the bees, where they really weren't organized in any certain way, or the termites. But now, and fill in the blanks in between, now we have, for example, for the leafcutter ants, they're still all herbivores. They go out and they cut the leaves, and it's all females. And the females go out, and the biggest ones cut the leaves, and they pass it to the slightly smaller males and the slightly smaller, and they take it inside, and they take it down, and they feed it to, I don't know if they grubs in there or something. They have moss. They use it to make moss grow, and then they all eat the moss. So they farm, and they eat the moss that's inside the mound. And there's different like castes, and like there's the ones that'll patrol, and they'll check on the queen, and they'll go back and forth. And there's the smallest ones that take care of the babies. And then there's the really large females that are the sentries. So if like an enemy comes by, and I don't know what predates on them, but when the enemy comes by, they'll attack it. And I think you would really enjoy looking. There was a few of these videos on the leafcutter ants on YouTube, where it would even show like the largest females would make two ranks facing outwards in like a street, and then the ones that carried the leaves would go down through the,
Oh, right. So they were protected the whole time.
yes. And when I was in Belize for my I was in Belize for a couple weeks to take a course in permaculture design.
Mhm.
The ants were there, and it was so odd because the ants would just like, they'd come out at in the afternoon when it wasn't too hot, but it'd be like this river. You know how you imagine a river, if you speed it up and you can see
Mhm.
how it moves in its course
Yes.
over, or if you're on Lake Michigan and you have like water and you're streaming it down.
Right.
That's how it looked. It looked like this, like slightly flowing, and if you block the path, they'd be like, whoop, no problem. And
Very
then
cool.
you were like, where did they go? But they would like denude the ground of all the leaves. They would just like, whoop, all the green leaves.
Right.
Quite
Oh,
amazing.
cool.
So one of the, are you interested in like conjecture?
Sure.
So one of the conjectures is that there's two ways it might go with us.
Mhm.
One way is that this general artificial intelligence will eventually be developed in, say, usually the projection is 30 or 40 years from now, and that will organize everybody so everybody's at the very most efficient to
Okay.
do whatever it is that society needs done. The other is something called global brain, and that one is more like when you look at your phone and your Facebook feed and you like things and you comment on things, and when you make comments and things get bumped up and bumped up and bumped up, like Black Lives Matter. Well, that gets bumped up and bumped up and bumped up, and it becomes a decision, basically. It's a decision made by the group as a collective group using their phones, which are all interconnected. And so the whole idea is, and it's not just that, but it's many ideas, like all lives, Black Lives Matter, yes, it's in addition to that,
Mhm.
it's other people's lives as well. Of course, number one, we have to protect those that have been subject to the most abuse, but we can't discount that the white supremacist who is rattling their AR
Mhm.
has also been abused by the system.
Right. Okay. Fair.
So that idea is basically that the global brain, collectively, everybody on their phones and computers and whatever connected devices they have, interacting with the debate which exists online. Like right now, my Facebook feed is filled with stuff about angry people in the cities and angry people in Washington, DC. And I mean, all of this stuff. And I mean, I'm starting to see kind of a consensus building that certain things that are being said are like not even in line with what we believe as a people. We believe that, yeah, property destruction is unfortunate and we don't want it to occur, but we don't want to see someone standing on someone else's neck until they
Right.
die.
Right.
More,
Yes, right. In the preference of things we don't want to see. Right. Okay. Yeah.
But that's like two different. One is like a right now sort of thing. This is a consensus, a swarm, collective decision making, which wasn't planned. I mean, nobody kind of planned for it to happen. It kind of emerged because of technology. And the other one is, well, no, we're gonna actually make a machine that can tell us that oh, if we just do these different things, then like the how to solve a game of chess. So the Google machine, Deep Blue or whatever it was called, I don't remember.
Oh, the IBM thing, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even the IBM one, it was the Google one. But the Google one, so it could tell a player how to play a game of chess, so that player would win every single time. It could tell a player how to play Go, which is the most difficult game to learn, with those little pebbles. You move the pebbles around. It's a Chinese game.
Okay, I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever seen it happen. But
it can tell the person how to move the pebbles around, so they'll win every single time. So the AI, and this isn't general AI. This very specific. It can only solve, or like in the Tesla cars, that the car can tell the person how to turn the steering wheel better than the person can, and so much so
the person doesn't even need to touch it.
Don't even need to touch it.
Right.
So all control is lost. So those are a couple futures that we're looking at.
Right.
I mean, I think of the global brain idea as being more like the eusocial ants and stuff, and the bees, and the termites, and the naked mole rats. I think of the AI one as being more like ultimate tyranny.
That is how it sounds to me in the way you explain it.
Well, just think about
be told.
Just think about the chess one, though. I mean,
it makes
to solve chess, what you're saying is there has to be a person sitting there playing the game,
right.
And so you have the computer telling the person, taking away all their agency for the entire time they're sitting there.
Exactly, which seems to me not so much fun, actually.
Not for that person, no. I mean, other than they get to observe like they're watching a film.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I want a little bit more agency in my own life. Thank you.
Thank you for going on that thought experiment with me, DiAnna.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. This has been really good. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from you.
I learned so much from you.
You have so much deep knowledge about all this thing. I mean, I haven't thought of the trauma in these ways before. And I mean, this has been really helpful, I think, for me. I mean, not just personally, but like in my worldview and my framing of things.
Well, and I also appreciate the way that you expand my mind into things that I haven't thought about in the same way. So I think we're good on the conversations. I like this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And for anybody watching us, please click thumbs up to show us your appreciation. And you can subscribe, and you can hit the bell and type in your email so you get notifications when we do a live thing or when we upload things, and put in a comment if this was in any way useful to you. If you were like, oh, this really touched me, like the thing about men, for example, it's okay for men to have feelings. It's okay for men to feel hurt. You know, men aren't allowed to do the, I mean, we're told that we have to be tough. You know, anything like that, anything in here that you found useful, or anything you'd like us to touch on the next time we're on a call. Anything for you, DiAnna?
No, I just wish you well. And
I wish you well too. And all my best wishes to you and all those you love.
And to you. I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.